We're going to turn now to our panel. Susan Page, of course, is a Washington bureau chief for USA Today. Dana Milbank, a columnist for the Washington Post. Jeffrey Goldberg, national correspondent for The Atlantic. We're also joined by Michael Crowley, senior foreign affairs correspondent for Politico, and CBS News political director John Dickerson. Michael, let me just start with you. This situation in Yemen, how could we not have seen this coming?
Well, Bob, there are so many moving parts in Yemen. I'm sympathetic to the administration trying to keep their arms around a country that a lot of experts describe as basically a failed state. So for several years now, we've been primarily worried about the al-Qaeda franchise in Yemen, known as al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Perhaps the most dangerous terror group in the world. We talk a lot about ISIS, but these are the guys that put the underwear bomber on a plane on Christmas Day 2009, have inspired some other near-miss attacks, and had ties to the massacre in Paris this month. So we were really focused on counter-terror operations against AQAP, but now you have this insurgency that has little to do with America, has to do with internal tribal and sectarian dynamics in that country. And I think it just came faster and harder than we expected. The government was more fragile than we expected. And now those counter-terror operations against al-Qaeda, as a result of the government basically collapsing, appear to be on hold or close to it. And that has real consequences for American security.
Jeffrey Goldberg, but that's the way it always seems to be lately. It always happens, and then we're surprised.
Right. I mean, Mosul fell in Iraq to ISIS, and we were shocked. People said it was coming for a year before that. There's a broader question here is that what we see over and over again in the greater Middle East is more and more countries are becoming ungoverned spaces. Yemen has always had an al-Qaeda problem, but now the entire country could fall under the control of a group that can use that territory to plot attacks against America. We have that across a broad swath of Iraq and Syria right now. Obviously, Pakistan and Afghanistan are problematic, and so Libya, of course, is collapsing on itself. So we have a situation in which the president could be leaving office in January of 2017 with hundreds of thousands of square miles of the greater Middle East under the control of terrorists plotting against the West. Terrible problem.
Susan, is this an example of what the president's critics are calling leading from behind?
Well, it could be. And, the president would very much like to talk about how the economy is getting better and how the Affordable Care Act is working for some Americans. But he is forced to deal over and over again with these foreign policy crises. And we heard not only criticism from Senator McCain in your interview, but from Senator Feinstein, another Democrat, expressing concern about the fact that intelligence failures here in Ukraine and elsewhere.
Go ahead, Dana.
Think about the extraordinary disconnect we saw this week. So we began with the State of the Union address that was about broadband and community colleges. He didn't mention the word al-Qaeda, certainly didn't mention Saudi Arabia or Yemen. He gave all of, I think, 65 words to counterterrorism at all. And then you see, it's been completely overtaken. So I think as the president said Tuesday night, he wants to turn the page. He's saying the crisis, the shadow of crisis has passed, but you can't just make it so by saying it. And you see how they've been sucked back in by Islamic State and the beheading, sucked back in by the Saudi king's death, and sucked back in by Yemen and now Egypt.
And also in the State of the Union, the president talked about his foreign policy as being deliberate, measured, a little bit smarter than maybe his critics had suggested. But what those critics are now saying is this deliberation that the president boasted about in his State of the Union, there is a kind of a sleep at the switch quality. He had mentioned Yemen when he was talking about U.S. operations in Iraq and Syria. He held Yemen up as the model. And so what their critics are now saying is, wait, you're holding up a country that's a model that's now fallen. You just are not aware of what's going on. They also point to other instances where he referred to ISIS, the threat from those kinds of terrorists, as being like the JV team. And that's where this is particularly damaging, because it's a question of really whether the administration knows what's going on.
Yeah, and Jeffrey, the president said just this morning in his news conference in India, he said that these reports that we are having to curtail some of our efforts against al-Qaeda in Yemen. He said those reports are simply not accurate. Well, how could they not be accurate when the government we were working with has just fallen?
Well, they might not be accurate at this moment, but in the coming days and weeks, it's going to be harder and harder for the U.S. to operate in Yemen. The force that seems to be taking over is a pro-Iranian force that has actually, although it's fighting al-Qaeda, also has come out against the use of drones. They are anti-American. They chant things like "Death to America" in the streets. It's going to be harder and harder even to maintain an embassy and maintain any kind of presence in Yemen, and it's going to be ungoverned space. So I think it's going to be, if it's not true at the moment, it's going to be true if things continue as they are.
Those operations had already been slowing down. According to data compiled by the New America Foundation, we conducted 56 drone strikes and airstrikes in Yemen in 2012. Last year, the number was 17 or 19, and I believe there have been 3 since mid-September. So as that government was destabilizing already, our cooperation with their military in this counter-terror effort was slowing way down.
And let me go back to you, Jeffrey, because I think you are one of the most informed people that I know of, certainly among reporters, on Israel and the situation there. What do you make of this thing of the John Boehner, apparently with the help of Ron Dermer, the U.S. ambassador, who, by the way, used to be on the staff of Newt Gingrich before he became an Israeli citizen, inviting Prime Minister Netanyahu to come here, the White House, again, totally blindsided by all of this. Is this a serious thing? Is it just something that is serious and is bogged down in both domestic politics there and here, or what's this all about?
Right. Well, we've known for a while that the relationship between Netanyahu and Obama is kind of like the marriage from hell. They can't get out of it, and they're stuck with each other. This has been a very, very strange episode. It's as if the Israeli government forgot that John Boehner is not the commander-in-chief. I mean, they're treating Boehner as if he has control over U.S. foreign policy and national security policy. It makes absolutely no sense, and I think that at this point we're looking at a situation in which the relationship between Netanyahu and Obama, who of course is the guy who's going to ultimately have to defend Israel if the Iran situation gets out of control, is frayed beyond repair, and so it's inexplicable to me why they're going down this path.
Extraordinary consequences to this, I think. I mean, people across America may think, well, what's the big deal? But consequences for the U.S.-Israeli relationship, consequences to the Boehner-Obama relationship. This is really an extraordinary breach of the way things are supposed to work when it comes to foreign policy in this country. And let's not forget that Netanyahu is going to come here to lobby for a bill that is before Congress on tougher Iranian sanctions that the president has threatened to veto. That is also extraordinary for a foreign leader to come here and get enmeshed in a battle that's before the American people, before the American legislature. This is really, really consequential.
All right, let's take a break here. We'll come back and talk some more about this and also about American politics. John Dickerson's just been out in Iowa yesterday for that extraordinary show, and we'll see what he has to say about that when we come back.